What does Bryce James bring to the University of Arizona? What does this mean then for other players? And we'll even get into a little bit of football talk here.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now let's talk first about Bryce James, and we're going to talk about LeBron. We're going to talk about Clutch. We're going to talk about some football recruiting notes and just some football notes in general. But first, Bryce James, as you know, we talked about it yesterday. Bryce James has committed to the University of Arizona. This is obviously a massive get for the U of A for a variety of different reasons. First, you got to give Jack Murphy, our guy, a lot of credit on this one. Murph works tirelessly behind the scenes, and I think the thing about him though too that you watch and you're like, all right, man, he just grinds. Like I said, I even got that pretty cool picture of him that I put up on social media with him and James and his mother. But either way, Bryce James, this is legitimately probably about top 250 players, something like that, somewhere in that realm. But there is upside there because again he's about 6'5". He's got a pretty good feel for the game. In transition, they like him. They like him a lot in transition, and like I said, there's a lot to like about him in transition. But overall, a pretty good basketball player. But the thing that I think people need to understand too is that LeBron isn't this helicopter parent. He's not the guy that he's not this. Like look when Bronny was at USC. Bronny didn't even. I mean, again, Bronny obviously had the heart attack, but Bronny didn't even start. And again, and then obviously you could say that he went off to the NBA. All of that, I get all that. But Bronny was not this high maintenance player, and I don't know that anybody would tell you that. I don't know that anybody would tell you that he was. So I would expect much the same with Bryce. Now, Bryce isn't as good as Bronny. I know a lot of people like to diss on Bronny, but at the same time, Bronny was a legitimate top 30 to 40 prospect in his class. Pretty good athlete, strong. If Bronny were to carve out a role as an NBA role player, on his own merits at some point, that wouldn't really surprise me. Bryce, like I said, Bryce isn't as good as him, but I think Bryce is also going to have to play the long game here. Bryce isn't going to be gone after a year. Bryce is, and the family understands that, and that's a big part of all this is that the family does understand that. If the family understands that, then you kind of go from you go from there. But again, a player that you're going to take along slowly, but at the same time, there is some potential down the road. This is kind of, like I said, this is taking a 3-star and then saying that, hopefully by his sophomore or junior year, he can be a contributor. We'll find out. We'll see how that does all play out. But overall, this was a no-brainer move. And all the people that are saying, well, you don't want LeBron here with the circus. Yes, you do want LeBron. He's the most recognizable athlete in the United States. He's one of the two best basketball players of all time. People need to get their dislike for LeBron out of the equation here because that doesn't matter. Even if you dislike LeBron, it doesn't matter for what we are talking about here. And you just need to kind of understand that. I'll just leave it at that. So having LeBron around though too, having him tweet out bear down or post on Instagram bear down, that stuff's invaluable because again, these kids grow up loving LeBron. He's an icon, and I can't really think of anybody else better to have around the program, to be honest with you, to have him at games, to have him at all kinds of different stuff. Now, so let's talk about then a little bit what this means then, because there's a lot of different things. First of all, Clutch is the biggest sports agency going right now. It is certainly the hottest name in circles, and there's a big reason why. First of all, it is run by LeBron James and Rich Paul. And there's a lot of guys coming up, especially on the West Coast, that are with Clutch or are affiliated with Clutch. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Brayden Burries. Now, I've said from day one that I think Brayden Burries is probably going to I've said from day one that I think Brayden Burries was probably not going to go to Arizona. I think this changes that a little bit because Burries is definitely a player that is going to the highest bidder type. That is, and again, that is not a diss by any means. I think people think of that as being I think that is being as a, I think people think of that as like being a diss. It's not a diss at all. I don't know that I wouldn't do the exact same thing. So anytime somebody I say that they're a highest bidder player, no problem with that. So obviously that with when it comes to some of these other when it comes to some of these other players though, um, you know, some people don't. Some people aren't necessarily looking for all of that. Burries wants to get paid, and I got no problem with that. Burries is also though with Clutch, and he's very, very close with Bryce James, with the James family. I would say that this definitely means a. I would say that this means a. How do I put this? I think there's an excellent chance now that he ends up at the U of A. Now, again, I don't have any inside scoop on this one. I wish I did. But I know that Arizona recently upped the offer, which is obviously a good thing. But Burries, like I said, Burries wants to Burries wants to get paid, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. So we will see how that one does play out. But overall, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that one plays out. I go back and forth all the time. Would you rather have a senior Bradley or a freshman Burries? I would rather have a senior Bradley, but at the same time, I kind of get both. I get both. I get both points of view. Okay. But Burries, this obviously helps Arizona out a great deal with Brayden Burries, and as you all know, Arizona has been recruiting Brayden Burries for a long time, and if they were able to get him, that would be another feather in Tommy Lloyd's cap, and I think it would probably get people off of his recruiting prowess a little bit. Again, we'll see how it plays out. But overall, Brayden Burries, this definitely helps with him. And again, what Arizona needs NBA players. I'm gonna keep going back to that. Arizona needs NBA players, and Brayden Burries is an NBA player. Now, again, he's a little bit older, but this isn't one of the cases where this isn't one of the cases where you're like, all right, well, he's pretty much just maxed out. There's a lot of potential there for Brayden Burries, and I think that's something that is exciting if you're an Arizona fan into how you can actually deal with this. Now, again, there would be growing pains if you have a super freshman lineup, but I think that you would try to address some of that stuff in the portal. You would potentially have some other players coming back as well, but kind of a no-brainer. Then with Koa Peat, it's much the same with Koa Peat. With Koa Peat, he is a he's another guy that is with I don't know if he's signed with Clutch, but he's certainly affiliated with Clutch, and that is the one too that Arizona's been recruiting since his freshman year, and you absolutely need to get him. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no excuses. You have to get Koa Peat. I don't know what else to say about it. You have to get Koa Peat. And the reason you got to get Koa Peat is, twofold. First of all, he's been if you're prioritizing an in-state kid from his freshman year on, you have to get him if you're the University of Arizona. I don't think that Arizona's ever lost a kid it prioritized early on, going back to Mike Bibby, going back to Richard Jefferson, Channing Frye, Jared Bayless, et cetera, et cetera. You got to get him. Period, point blank. You just got to get him. Can't lose him. And he gives Arizona something that they haven't really had. Arizona, this year is a very below the rim basketball team. There's not outside of Henry. There's really next to no shot blocking influence at all, and that's something that kind of I think comes into that can kind of come in and be a detriment at some points because last year you had Umar Ballo who wasn't necessarily a shot blocker but he could get in your way. Keyshawn Johnson could help out on the weak side, things like that. You don't really have any of that this year because Trey Townsend is very much of a below the rim basketball player, as is Tobe Awaka. So Koa Peat gives you somebody can catch oops, can get out in transition, can finish. You need players like that. You need things like that because again, the end of the day, you need NBA players. It's not an end all be all, and I think there's obviously a time where you can, go with who you think is probably the best fit from a transfer portal and NBA player perspective, but you need top end talent. I think Danny Hurley has done that perfectly the last few years at UConn, blending in your Tristan Newtons with your Stephon Castles, guys like that, your Donovan Klingons, et cetera, et cetera. Arizona's got to do much of the same here. And if you can get some of these kids that we're going to continue to talk about, that makes things a lot easier, I think, for all sides. But again, Burries and Peat very, very much in play right now. I mean, I always think that Peat was in play, but Brayden Burries certainly in there as well because of this connection and because that Arizona obviously did up that offer. So that is a good thing for Arizona fans. Now we're going to talk about how this maybe affects Alijah Arenas here in just a second, but first. All right, it is time for FanDuel, my friends. Check it out. FanDuel. Here's the great thing about FanDuel. You can put down $5 if you're a new customer, and you can get $250 in free plays. That simple, that easy. Check it out at FanDuel. And here it is. This is a great time of the year because you got the NBA going on, you got the NFL, you got college football, you got college basketball. You've got a variety of different things going on, and I think that is what's so fun about all of this. So again, check it out at FanDuel. Great thing too about FanDuel too, your money's good, and there's nothing better than saying, you know what, I think the odds makers got this backwards a little bit. I don't like the flow of this game for so and so. I'm gonna put in money on this. That's what makes this all exciting. That's what makes this all fun. FanDuel, again, your one-stop shop. Check it out at FanDuel.com. Again, going to thank me later on this one. Plus, this is the best time of the year to get in. Also, get in on some of those futures. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now let's talk about Alijah Arenas. I don't think that this negatively impacts Alijah Arenas at all. Alijah Arenas is listen, out of all these players, I think Alijah Arenas is the one that has the highest NBA potential. If you were to ask me, say, who's the one that is, out of all these guys, is most likely to be an NBA All-Star, I would say it's Alijah Arenas. He's 6'5", 6'6", really long wingspan, great feel for the game. The comparison that people make that I really like is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think that is a great comparison because again, he's slipper. He might not, jump 55 feet in the air and dunk on you, although he could. But the way that he can kind of slide through traffic, he's slippery. Like I said, he's a difference maker. He is a 3-level scorer. He's got a very polished game. Obviously, I think you got to give a lot of that credit to his father. But what he can do is, like I said, he's a difference maker. And I think if you're Arizona, you look at that and you're like, all right, that's something that you would like to have here at the U of A. Watching him too, the other thing that's interesting about him is you see him and he's always under control. He's a remarkable basketball player, honestly. I mean, again, I don't know if there's anybody that has a higher upside in the entire class. He reclassified because, well, honestly, it was stupid for him to stay in 2026 when he's already light years better than everybody else. You get him, which you should. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to this as well. Gilbert Arenas has said many, many times that the place where his son can make the most money is at the University of Arizona. Because forget the name, image, and likeness. People buying his jerseys, people buying all of his stuff. It just makes a lot of sense for his son to come to the U of A. Just is what it is. Plus, how cool would that be to see Gilbert Arenas and LeBron James at games? That would be some pretty cool stuff. I mean, they certainly had some battles back in 2007, 2008, but that's something that Arizona, like I said, I think is very much a possibility at this point of getting all three of these guys. Again, I am not guaranteeing that this is going to happen, but we are kind of at the stage now where I think that you can look at it and say, all right, there's a legitimate chance that all of that occurs. And I think that's the exciting part about all of this is that there is a legitimate chance. It's not like a smoke. It's not like, you're like, oh, all right, well, we need 10 billion things to go right. But that, again, that's the power of LeBron James. I thought before that Arizona needed to get two of these three, and I certainly still believe that. But you also got to understand, though, too, that I think all three of these guys are in play, and you just kind of see how this plays out. Now, the other one, too, that we haven't been given enough love for, but he's an absolute stud. He's probably a legitimately top 15 player in his class is Dwayne Aristod obviously from the East Coast. At 6'8", 225. He's somebody that, how do I put this? He's somebody that he's a difference, he's a difference maker as well. He brings in an athlete, very dynamic athleticism. He can shoot. He's getting continuously better. He's definitely an NBA player at some point. And he's somebody too that you watch him and you're like, man, he moves a little different. He plays a little different. Aristod is somebody that is, like I said, going to be a big difference maker as well. If you could get a recruiting class, I'm just saying this right now, I've been doing this a long time. If you could get a recruiting class of Brayden Burries, Peat, Alijah Arenas, Dwayne Aristod, and Bryce James, then, I mean, that's hands down the best recruiting class in the country, and that's the best recruiting class in Arizona history. And there's been some really, really good recruiting classes at Arizona, but that would be the best. That would be the one that would take the cake because you've got three top 10 prospects, and then you got a fourth one that's merely top 15. Then you got Bryce James in there as well, who's certainly not a lost cause. So again, that would be, I mean, we talked about it before. 2025 is the year that Tommy Lloyd needs to hit the ball out of the park when it comes to recruiting, and everything is teed up for him at this point. You've already got Aristod, which has made the commitment, but then, like I said, like we've been laying out here, with Brayden Burries, Peat, Alijah Arenas, this is all set up. You got to be able to close, and I think we're gonna find out what kind of closer Tommy Lloyd is. Because again, these spots are all set up for him. And Arizona going into next year, the hype around that team would be absolutely insane with those kind of players. Plus, you got to look at the roster too. There's going to be dudes that are coming back. Probably a good chance that a Henry Vasar is back, who at this stage, it's fair to say Henry can play. To what level Henry can play, I don't know. I don't think anybody quite knows. But Henry is obviously a valuable player. You're going to get a Walker back most likely. You got Emmanuel Steven coming back for another year. You got some dudes that that are they're going to be valuable role players that can all do some things, and that's what I think is going to be exciting to watch with Arizona and to see how this does play out. Because here's the other thing: this team. If Tommy Lloyd has talent and dudes that know how to run, Tommy Lloyd's going to let them run. And I think that's the thing that's exciting about all of this is just watching how these guys play, watch how they, because people ask all the time, they're like, well, what's Tommy Lloyd's identity? Well, Tommy Lloyd's identity is free-flowing, getting the ball up and down the court, and playing pretty basketball. And I think that's where, people, but if you've got kind of ball-dominant players, it becomes a little bit more difficult to be able to sustain that. That's why I think Arizona obviously has to get some different players in here, get a little bit more talent, and then I think at that point you're probably good to go. But this is the recruiting class that you need to be able to kind of push into the future and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. This kind of talent. We are Arizona. And who knows? You get Carter Bryant back, and you could maybe go with a lineup of Brayden Burries, Alijah Arenas, Carter Bryant, Peat, and Henry Vasar. Let me know how that works for anybody else out there. Let me know how that works for anybody else. That's obviously the dream. We'll see if Tommy Lloyd can obviously make that happen. But now, game time, my friends. Game time. Check it out. Here's the deal with game time. All right, game time. Now, you might say to yourself, Mike, game time. Well, that's just sporting events, right? No. You are wrong. You are wrong. Here's the deal. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime. What time is it? Gametime. Ooh. All right, now, the great thing about it is you got all-in pricing. Toggling the feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. The lowest price is guaranteed on Gametime. We'll credit you 100% the difference. Ooh. Like I said, I know somebody that was at the Alamo Bowl. They didn't have any tickets, and guess what they did? They went to Gametime, and they thanked a lot of people later for it. Check it out again. Not just for sporting events, but they do specialize in that. All kinds of good stuff. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about. So we're going to, like I said, Carter Bryant, all of that. There's a lot of guys that it'll be interesting to see how this offseason plays out. Now we are a football school, so let's talk a little bit about football. All right, now. I'm going to keep coming back to it. The offensive line is my biggest concern. One thing, though, that this staff needs to do is they need to do a good job of evaluating players and playing the right ones. Watching Big Bill Norton for Texas, very annoying because, again, he should have never been locked in a heated battle with Chuba Muai. That is not the situation. Deuce Davis, very much the same way. Tacario Davis, going to smelly, rainy Seattle. It's kind of a weird situation with Tacario because Tacario wasn't good this year. Now, I don't want to pull the Sheer thing where the second a guy leaves, I just say that he's not very good. But he wasn't very good this year. I don't know what else to say. So there's that. Plus, he was kind of annoying to watch on the field because he was always getting into it. When he was getting burned, just wasn't impressive. So he's obviously gone. You've got Javion Cole. And then it's going to be interesting to see who else you're able to bring in. Marquise Groves Killebrew has entered the transfer portal. We'll see how that plays out because he could go to Nebraska. And, I don't know that he's going to start there, but he could play. He's not a bad player. The problem is he had some really rough games. So we'll see. But whoever it is, I expect Dwayne Aquina to make that unit more than good enough because that's what Dwayne Aquina does. But you got obviously the secondary back, the safeties coming back. Those are big. You got Genesis, Dalton Johnson. We're gonna find out though. This is gonna be an interesting. It's gonna be an interesting offseason for Arizona because I think at this point I feel pretty good about the skill position players. I also feel pretty good about the secondary overall. Linebackers worry me. But again, you got a very nice addition to put next to Tay Brown, so that should help. The line, you've got to get Fisher from UNLV, guy that had 7.5 sacks last year. You put him, and then you got Trey Smith as your second pass rusher, and then you got Chase Kennedy. All of a sudden, that's not too bad, but you got to be able to get that, and I think that's where if you're an Arizona fan, that's going to be the priority. You've got to be able to get to that point. Okay, now, but that's really where this is at this point. I think overall they've done a fairly nice job, but again, the lines still scare me, and I get this. I know, trust me, I get the old adage about the offensive line. You have to have that offensive line set up. And yes, you're right. You absolutely do. You got to have the defensive line set up as well. And if you don't have those set up, then that's obviously going to be a problem. So we will see how this. We will see. I do, like I said, I'm hopeful. You can turn around things really quickly in college football. You look at what ASU just did, but you've got to be able to really evaluate well. Not only do you have to evaluate well, you've also got to be able to hit the transfer portal, and you've got to be able to get players that are difference makers. And I think that's something that certainly in that first year, Brent Brennan didn't do. But we'll see. But either way, this is an awesome time. Arizona basketball, the recruiting should really pick up. Now, tomorrow we're going to talk about Cincinnati. You've obviously got the Cincinnati preview coming up, and Cincinnati that's going to be a tough road game, but it's also a very winnable game for the Cats, and it's a game that if Arizona wins that game, then you feel pretty good going forward that you can run off a few wins because that's I think that's kind of where what you're hoping for, at least for the U of A, is that you can kind of catch fire and just keep that one going. And if you can do that, then you're going to be in good shape. But again, 1-0 in the Big 12 so far. We'll see how this. We'll see what happens. But big news though. Bryce James here, LeBron James. You got clutch is a factor. Keep an eye on Brayden, Burries, Peat, Alijah Arenas. We'll obviously be keeping you up to date on that one as well. But as always, very much appreciate you all making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Bear down, back the A, and we will be back with you tomorrow every single day. You know how this thing goes.